And here we are, motivating you to live more creatively. I'm Rod Jones.
And I'm Angie Jones. Welcome to the Thought Road Podcast. Let's start with a motivational quote.
What do you have for us today, Angie?
Well, this quote was given to us by our guest today, and it's a good
Exciting.
one. So here's the quote. It says, "Don't say you don't have enough time. You have exactly the same number of hours per day that were given to Helen Keller, Pasteur, Michelangelo, Mother Teresa, Leonardo da Vinci, Thomas Jefferson, and Albert Einstein." And the quote is by H. Jackson Brown, Jr.
That's quite a quote.
Isn't it, though?
And quite a group of talent. And I guess when you think about it, we're all dished out 24 hours a day, filled with hours and minutes, and what we do with those pretty much is our choice, right? We all have free will.
True.
And we can make the decision, what am I going to do with every precious minute of the day? That doesn't mean that you really shouldn't take a break sometimes to recharge your batteries, but it's also kind of important that you make your hours of your life productive. They pay off in the long run, at least I think they do.
Well, they really do, but I think what maybe my interpretation of this, and this is very honest, is when you say, oh, I didn't have enough time to do something, it's because you prioritized everything else over what you really wanted to do. So maybe what this means is that these people were better at prioritizing their time instead of putting everything else in front of what you wanted to do.
Well, when you consider their histories, their biographies, their CVs even, they're pretty packed full of earth-shattering, life-changing.
Big time.
They impacted hundreds of millions of people around the world just by what they did or what they created or what they taught or what they even learned in some cases, like Helen Keller.
Right on. Well, so for me, my takeaway, because I try to learn from our quotes or try to apply them, and I'm sure everybody else out there does as well when you hear a quote, and that is, how can I apply this quote? If you're saying, I don't have enough time, maybe you need to evaluate the time you do have.
Yeah,
what
perfect.
are you doing?
So what's our topic today?
Well, today we're going to talk about art museums.
There's no shortage of art museums around the world.
No.
So I'm going to hit you with this one.
No.
What's your favorite art museum?
My favorite art museum, well, I have a special place in my heart for the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, because that is where I saw the self-portrait of Van Gogh that brought me to tears. I think that's why I love it so much. And also it's a very cool museum, and it has a lot of contemporary art, which I enjoy a lot.
It's kind of eclectic, too. I mean, they have some beautiful sculptures in there.
They do.
And I like the fact it's in that old train station.
Yes.
In fact, it's the train station you often see in movies. Old black and white movies. They filmed a lot of those movies in there. And in fact, there's a famous photograph. Actually, it was turned into a painting. I shouldn't say photograph. It was a painting. And I think it was Monet that did it, where they closed the station or had everybody stay back so he could capture or create a painting of the steam coming out of one of those steam engines.
I remember that.
Yeah, it's a famous painting. And, of course, it disrupted all of Paris to think that an artist was able to go in there and shut down their transportation system. So he could capture the steam in all of its authenticity. So what is your favorite museum in the United States?
My favorite museum in the United States? That's a good question. I think it would have to be the Hammer in West LA. And I think I like that because I really enjoy the layout of it. It's never really super crowded, which is a good thing or a bad thing, I guess, if you look at it in museum speak. And I really like their little room downstairs where they feature new artists exhibiting. And I think that's such a fun little room. I would just go there just to see that because it's always so fresh and exciting to see who the new artist is. I mean, I enjoy seeing the established artists and the ones that are tried and true, but I do enjoy seeing the new works.
Yeah, their permanent collection they've got some pretty masterful pieces in their collection. But after we've walked around that museum for a little while, I really like going to their outside cafe and having a cup of tea.
Oh, me too. That's my other favorite thing to do there. It's very serene. It has a nice energy to it, so it's really nice. So, Rod, what is your favorite museum?
Well, this is going to be a little bit difficult because I don't know how to pronounce it.
Okay, where?
And I'm not even going to attempt it in case somebody that's been to that museum is going to think, gosh, can't you speak our language? It's a museum in Zurich. And I remember we had to walk through neighborhoods. We had to hump up a hill, go through various neighborhoods. In fact, even when we got there, it's a big 2-3-story, almost mansion-like looking home. And when we went into it, I thought, I don't know about this place, but it turned out to be an incredible museum, and they had incredible works of art.
I remember.
The one thing that I always thought was a little mysterious about it is it didn't look like it had much security. We went from floor to floor. There was literally nobody following us, I mean, we would walk up to a Rembrandt and a Van Gogh, you name it. They had it in that museum.
They had it all.
And I remember saying to Angie and our daughter, it just seems to me they should have more security in this place. Well, unfortunately, I mean, I never said that outside of our own personal conversation, but several years later, we found out that it was robbed, and they lost hundreds of millions of dollars of paintings, and that only represented, I guess, the thieves walked off with 4 paintings. It's a real tragedy, but if you ever have the opportunity, you could look it up online. I'm sure you could figure it out. Mm-hmm. But it's the museum in Zurich. It's pretty spectacular.
Yeah, and was a special museum.
And I'm hoping you're going to ask me my favorite museum in the United States.
I am going to ask you, what is your favorite museum in the United States?
The Huntington Library.
Oh.
Now, there's a couple of things I like about it. They do have art shows there. They invite artists in to have a show. But the thing that I think I like about it, besides the gardens are incredible, the sculptures are incredible, but they have a library. I mean, that Huntington Library. They have a tremendous collection of literature, and they have original copies of Shakespeare, you name it, they've got it. But the publication or the book that I like the most is Audubon's book with the incredible illustrations of birds. It's an original copy. They have it in a case, but they can flip pages for you if you really beg them to do that. The other thing is you could do research there. They have a little research library. Mm-hmm. So if you want to read an original work by Tennyson or Thoreau or Emerson, whatever, they have it all. And you can actually sit down and go through some of these books. I don't think they give you the original signed copies to review, but going into that library is really special, and it's a piece of art all unto itself.
It really is. And I remember that Audubon book, and it is absolutely stunning. Such a stunning book, and as well as the other books that are there. Yeah,
the gardens and stuff that are there it's just a lovely place to go spend a day or even spend a week in there. One reason, and there are many of the museums in this world are really wonderful. And one of the reasons why I think so many people like to go there is because you actually have a chance to look at original work of art.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with you, Rod. I know for me, I derive a tremendous amount of pleasure looking at an original piece of art in person, especially if I have the luxury of visually exploring it myself.
You can't get that, even especially now, we're kind of forced to look at art on our computers, or if you want to look up a special piece you heard about, or even if you want to see an online collection from a museum you've visited or always wanted to visit, you have to look at it on a computer, a mobile phone. Unfortunately, a lot of people look at art on their mobile phones, and there's just no way you could ever get the interpretation of what that artist intended in that painting. You can never pick it up through a piece of glass.
No, I don't think you can. It's difficult, even though you can see the image and it looks very beautiful, of course, but you really don't get the essence of the painting or the artwork. Even a photograph, I think when you see them in person, is far different than looking at it online.
I think another interesting thing about museums that we've discovered is now they all have large photographic collections.
Which is nice.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you'll see, in many cases, you'll see more people in the gallery with the photography than you do with the art. Yeah. And I think people really relate to photography now, which is really kind of exciting and interesting. But, you'll walk into a main gallery and you'll see their prized pieces and you'll see people, a group around them, especially if there's a tour going on and they're explaining the work of art.
Yeah. So true.
I know when Angie and we have to photograph our art so we can post it on social media and especially on our websites. And we're very careful in how we photograph it, but you still have to tweak it. We'll stick it into Lightroom or Photoshop and just make some minor adjustments trying to get the color right or the contrast is right so it looks good on a screen. But it never fully translates.
No, I don't think it does either.
You do the best job you can, but I'll go and look at an original piece of art that I've created or one that Angie's created, and I get very excited about it. It gives off this really interesting energy, and then I look at it after we photographed it and put it on our websites and I go, yeah, well, that's kind of nice, but, but it's a good introduction. I mean, at least it gives people an opportunity to see your work because not everybody is going to get an opportunity to come into your home or into your studio and see your work in person. Mm-hmm. The benefits of a museum is they're open to everybody and you can stand in front of a painting and meditate as long as you would like, I guess.
Yeah, that's the good part about going in person to a museum or I'm going to say gallery where you can actually feel, sense, look at it with your own eyes, see the textures the artist has put on the canvas, or if it's a sculpture, you can really see the technique they used. And I think it really gives you a different perspective of how the art is perceived by the artist.
If you read a biography on your favorite artist and you have the opportunity to go to a museum and see their work in person, it just makes that biography so much richer.
Oh, true. Very true.
You don't really fully, especially if a book has an illustration or a plate of a painting, like Venus de Milo or something, you don't really capture the feeling of that painting in what you see in a book. Now you get a nice background on it, what the artist was thinking, what he did, how he did it. Right. But that's open to interpretation. But when you stand in front of a great work of art, it's just completely different.
Agree, 100%.
The United States is got some pretty famous museums and some excellent collections of work. And there's shows that are traveling. They go all around the world. We had an opportunity once to see Agnes Martin. Both Angie and I really wanted to see that show. And it was on tour around the world.
At LACMA, wasn't it?
Yeah, it ended up in LACMA, I think.
It was a
I actually went to
show.
San Francisco after that. But that was she's an interesting artist.
Yeah, she is very interesting. That's one of those artworks where if you try to photograph it, impossible. You cannot get the subtle nuances and the shade colors, and how she constructs her art is very different in person as opposed to looking at something online. In fact, you gave me a book a long time ago, I want to say a few years ago, on Agnes Martin, which one of my favorite artists. I love her. And it is the most exquisite book I have ever seen in my life. And it stays on our bedroom dresser because I just adore it so much. But it's such a personal, it almost looks like a journal, the way they constructed it. And I have to say that's the closest it's come to looking like Agnes Martin's work when you see it in person than I've seen in other books.
Yeah, that one was rendered really well. I think what was interesting to me in the book is it showed how she painted or how she created her art with the little pencil lines, etc. Mm-hmm. But her all of her tools, she had this old dresser, one tube of paint, couple pencils, and a little brush.
Which goes to show you, if you want to make art, you can make it happen no matter how little you have.
Talk about meeker tools. I mean, she didn't have a lot of money. Money was always tight for her, especially in the beginning. Fortunately, she had some friends that started to promote her, but she lived very humbly in a very small home, if you could call it that. Mm-hmm. And all she did basically was paint. And if you ever or create her art, I can't even say they're all paintings, but if you ever have the opportunity to see them, you can understand why she would spend hours and hours and hours developing some of those works of art. And some of them are quite large. There's some small ones there, but some of those, what would you say they were?
Oh, gosh.
A few feet across, a few feet tall.
Across, yeah. A majority of them were very, very large. I was surprised at how big they were.
Yeah, and that's just an example of what happens when you have the opportunity to go to a museum. There's museums virtually in every town, in every city for sure. There's some really major museums. And maybe if you have to drive a little bit, visit a museum, no matter where you are in the world. Yeah, of course, it's fun to say, oh, I went to the Louvre or some major museum in the world, but the smaller museums actually have an awful lot to offer. We went to a museum once at Bakersfield, and they had Picasso porcelains.
Which was really fascinating. They were so good.
Yeah, I would have never seen those anywhere else in the world. How
never.
They pulled that together, I don't know, but that was pretty exciting to see that. Plus, it was very intimate. The way they had everything laid out,
right.
You could get very close to him. You could really explore him and see what he was trying to interpret. Mm-hmm. Abstractly, I should say.
You know, I have to say, when we went to the Picasso Museum, and that's where we saw some pottery that he had done and ceramics, that's the only other place I've ever really seen that. When we went to the Bakersfield Museum, they had quite the little show there.
Yeah, no, and you compare that to they had that giant Picasso show at the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
Yeah, you saw
in New
that.
York.
I didn't see that
Yeah,
one.
I was lucky enough to see that it was there. But what was really interesting is they had some tiles that he did, but I don't ever remember seeing any pottery there.
Oh, really? That's
and probably the thing that I was most excited to see, because I'd only seen photographs of it and I always wondered what it looked like in person, was the portrait he did of Gertrude Stein.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So that painting was there.
That painting was there.
Oh.
And that was pretty special because you see it on the cover of books.
Yes.
You see it rendered at a lot of different places, but I never have had the opportunity to see it in person and probably never will. That was a touring show, and I just happened to be in New York, and I just happened to be able to go see it.
Yeah, you're lucky to see that one. It was a good show. There's a relatively new museum in Southern California that's in its 7th year, and it's called the Sasse Museum of Art. That's
the museum that was founded by Gene Sasse.
Right, and who we are delighted to have as our guest today.
I'm looking forward to this. Hi, Gene. Welcome to the Thought Row podcast.
Hi, Gene. It's good to have you today. We always like to start out with a tough question. So here you go.
Are you ready for this, Gene?
I guess so.
I hope so.
I'm sitting on the edge of my chair wondering what you're going to ask.
Yeah, hang on. It's earth-shattering. No, the question is, what did you have for breakfast today?
Well, it's probably something a little off the wall, but I had a peanut butter raisin and cinnamon wrap.
Mm.
Oh, that sounds good.
Is that something that you concocted yourself, or is that store-bought?
No, I make it. I guess it probably came from in my backpacking days. I found a recipe in Backpacker magazine. They call it Backpacker's Delight.
Oh.
And it had peanut butter, raisins, soy lecithin, tiger's milk, poppy seeds, and a whole bunch of other stuff.
That sounds really delicious.
That sounds like a good way to start a day, too.
Yeah, it does. Lots of fuel.
Gives you the energy that you need to make it through your daily tasks.
Exactly.
Well, I will start out by asking you, you've been managing you've had dual careers, I should say.
Yeah.
One as a commercial photographer, and the second as the founder and director of the Sasse Museum of Art. And how do those two work together?
Most of my career, I've been a storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
I tell visual stories with my photography, the exhibits, books and catalogs that I do. And I also teach at a community college, and I also tell my students, that we're visual storytellers. And so I build on that all the time. And life's all about telling stories.
Well, photography, certainly, it's a visual thing, and a lot of photography is, I guess you could say, editorial. you're not painting something, you're actually capturing something. So you have to put your thoughts and ideas in your mind, take a picture of it, interpret it, and then I guess it sounds like you write about it too. Is that correct?
A little bit.
Okay. When you're doing the visual storytelling, as photography is, what kind of response do you hope to evoke from the audience?
Boy, that's a good question. I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but as I said, life is all about storytelling. That's how we convey ideas and history and everything else. So I guess my goal is to start a dialogue with the viewers and for them to interject their own life stories.
That's wonderful.
When you're teaching photography, do you talk to your class that way, or do you say, hey, we're going to, you give them an assignment, and the assignment is to create a visual story about a cactus or something? Do you ever do that?
Yeah, I visit it frequently. Basically the assignment is storytelling using XYZ and or to visually tell a story about something. It's a concept that they're not used to hearing. So, but and my goal as an instructor is to try to motivate them, inspire them to go outside their comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
Does it work?
Yeah. Does it work?
I think so. It's funny. I talked to my assistant this morning about that, and I've had students that come back at a later date and says, "Well, I had no idea that that this assignment would benefit me later on in my career." Oh. And one of the things I do that none of the instructors do is give assignments where they have to shoot to a particular crop. And one of my students got a job recently working for a company where she's doing G-clay prints, and a client came in and wanted all these particular sizes that she had to scale it to, and she goes, wow, I never thought that would come into being able to need it, and all of a sudden she did. And most of the time students say, well, why do we have to do this type of stuff? Why are you so bent on giving us all these weird proportions and crops and things?
Well, as a teacher, that must have been gratifying to you. It's always nice to hear back from a student. Not that I've ever had one, but I would like to hear from one.
It is. It's far and few in between, but every once in a while I do hear back. And I've had a couple students gave an assignment and they go, I hate that type of stuff. And after they did it, they go, wow, that's really quite fun. I enjoy doing that. I'm going to do more of it.
Yeah, you're expanding their mind. I mean, you're doing what a good teacher does. I understand that you've been a commercial photographer your whole adult life, and then you decided to build an art museum. Why did you decide to do that, Gene?
I felt there was a need that wasn't being met in this area. LA has lots of art museums and different venues. Out in this area, there's very few, and most of the galleries are on college campuses. And I wanted to do something different than what was being done. And I think I've accomplished that. I've had people come back and say, wow, you're doing things that the big boys aren't doing with, the electronic catalogs on our website and things. But
yeah, those are very impressive.
Very nice.
Very impressive, those electronic catalogs.
I felt there was a need, and I could wait for somebody to do it, or I could do it. And I guess I'm a starter, so I went ahead and went down that road.
Well, we have a little bit of a follow-up with that, and that is both Angie and I were thinking about this. Do you think that in retrospect, was that a good decision to start this museum?
Yes and no.
What are the yeses?
Well, there was a need, and I had a lot of tools in my tool belt that I could use to start it. I was a web developer. I have worked on a lot of art books. I know a fair amount of artists. I had curated maybe a dozen exhibits for another small museum. So I felt I had, the tools I needed. So that's why I went down that road. The no is there's just a lot of work. Most of the work falls on my shoulders. And so I produce most of the catalogs. I've got a client. When I first started in business, he's a graphic designer, and he does some of the more sophisticated catalogs and the logos and stuff that we use. But I started the museum with nothing, from nothing, and would have been nice having financial reserves and the money to hire the talent I need to grow the museum.
Oh, sure. I think that's an issue even with the big boys now. I want to go back to your photography for 1 minute. I know that periodically you've had shows, photography shows in museums of your own work. And in fact, Angie and I had the opportunity to go to one, and we were very impressed with your talent, your landscapes, and your interpretation of nature. What excites you about it when you see your work hanging on the wall of a museum?
Wow.
We know you get excited because we all do.
I guess, to be honest, I don't, I enjoy it. It's nice seeing it on the walls.
Well, you get feedback when you're standing there. I noticed because we had an opportunity to visit one. But one of the things that I noticed is you were standing in front of one of your photographs, and there would be anywhere from 1, 3, 4, 5 people all standing around asking you questions about it. I'm sure they go, well, what f-stop did you use? Or, but they'll probably say, where did you photograph this? Because a lot of your black and white photographs are from very interesting locales
that are not common.
They're not common. I mean, you went out of your way to go out there. So I'm guessing you get some satisfaction just by the questions that people ask you, and they help you explore it even further. Is that correct?
Yes. When I go out, I go to explore. If I find something interesting, I photograph it. With digital, it's a lot easier and, doesn't take as much setup. Before that, I primarily shot large format, which was 4x5. You have sheet film and everything's on a tripod. And then later on, I switched to my medium format. Still had to use a tripod, but wasn't nearly quite as much equipment. And with digital, it's just it's a lot freer to explore things and not having to haul hundreds of sheets of film or dozens of rolls of film. So
right. Now, I know I'm going to continue with your commercial photographer topic here. And as a commercial photographer, you had to deal with so many different client personalities. How has this prepared you for dealing with the personality of artists in a museum?
I've had difficult clients, and some of them incredibly difficult. And I only had one client that I almost walked off the job on, but I didn't. And I have a difficult when somebody asks me a question and tell me after I give the answer that my question was useless or not needed. And then my question is, why did you ask that question to begin with? But,
yeah, sure.
I never tried. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, all I was going to say is clients are one thing. Artists, I think, can be a whole nother animal, if you will. They all have so many different personalities and different perspectives. As dealing with the clients, has that helped you in dealing with artists' personalities?
Probably. I don't try to force my views on other people. I listen to what they have to say, and go from there. I'm a good listener. And a lot of artists that that are difficult, and they just says, "Wow, you listen," and I don't try to change their mind or anything. So, but basically, I'm a good listener, so I use that.
Right.
When you curate, because you have to curate the show for your museum, it's your museum, and you select the pieces that you want to hang. How does that go? When you're dealing with artists, do they give you any oh, no, I don't want you to select that one? How does that go? How do you mitigate those kinds of challenges?
I haven't had many of those. I've only had a couple. One artist, he's one of the difficult artists I dealt with. I did an exhibit, and he walks in, he goes, "That piece is upside down." And I go, "Oh, do you want me to rotate it?" It was an abstract piece. And he goes, "Well, of course, you hung it upside down." So I walked over, took it off the wall, and looked at the back, and I hung it by the way his signature was. So I hung it upside down to the signature upside down.
That was his artist's statement.
But for the most part, it's been pretty easy, and everybody is pretty accommodating. I haven't had very many battles or discussions and stuff. A lot of artists, they've come in and start wanting to design it and stuff, and then they just turn it over and say, you do it, and they go, "Wow, you did a better job than I would have," and there's been a number of artists that, if they participate in, more than one exhibit, and they say, just do it. You just, you're far better than we do it. So
I think a lot of artists feel that way.
Yeah.
I think they love it when somebody curates their show because it helps them have a new perspective. And unfortunately or fortunately, depending upon how you want to look at it, when an artist does a painting, they often are so involved in it, or they go, boy, I was so lucky I was able to make that shade of purple. So they have a bunch of energy into that. So then they think when they have a painting that's hung in a museum that everybody's going to feel or see what they put into it and not necessarily what the casual viewer would see when they walk up to it. So I think having, and I've seen some of your shows that you've curated, and they work together great. The paintings all seem to flow nicely. It's a nice tour for a visitor when you go from painting to painting or painting to photograph, or in some cases when you have a piece of sculpture in there. You have done a really good job. I mean, I know, unfortunately, we haven't had the opportunity to see that many of your shows, but the ones that we have had the opportunity to visit your museum, the layout has been great.
And also, I feel like you are very good at translating maybe what the artist isn't cognizant of their artwork and what they want to express. So I think it's kind of a cool thing when you as a curator making an exhibit that you are able to translate that artist's feeling and what they want to convey.
Yeah, I probably approach it differently than a lot of curators. I approach it from a visual standpoint. How do they work together? How do they speak to each other? And I did an exhibit middle of last year, and it was interesting. I hear artists say all the time, pieces talk to each other, but that particular exhibit, the pieces really did talk to each other, and there was a dialogue that went on between them that was amazing. It was all abstract work, but still, it was your thoughts went from piece to piece. And the story it built in your mind was really quite fascinating.
Yeah, this is when an exhibition really shines, when you go somewhere and it's exactly what you said, where there's a communication going on amongst the paintings and amongst the message and the artist. So it's like it really has a nice triad of communication.
Yeah, no, I think I would agree on that.
Yeah.
Well, you're lucky that you could see that in person.
Right. Besides the constraints of curating shows from artists in different time zones, how have you managed to make that work?
Actually, it's no different than dealing with somebody that's out of state or in Northern California. With the tools we have with Zoom and WhatsApp, it's really very easy now. Plus, all the people I've dealt with have spoke English, so that helps. I did do an exhibit with a Korean photographer one time, and she did not speak English.
No.
And I remember we had a meeting at a hotel lobby, and the receptionist, she had him translate, and
that's tough.
It was interesting. She talked for maybe a minute and paused, and he looked at me, and he goes, "I don't have the slightest idea what she said. Something technical about photography."
Oh, yeah. He wouldn't necessarily know those terms, maybe.
Yeah. So your online presence has been a productive tool then for you.
It has. No, it has. It's interesting from the beginning, viewing the stats and stuff, but we had viewers from around the world and probably from well over 50 different countries.
Mm.
Well, that's exciting.
That's so exciting.
I have a kind of a question related to the business side of this. Running an art museum would be considered to be like running any other kind of business. What do you think has been your greatest challenge, Gene?
It goes back to money, raising money, and then having the money to hire, people to do the work necessary. I started the museum with nothing, from nothing, and then was able to build, a sizable collection that has been totally donated. We have over 1,300 pieces in the collection, including painting, photography, drawing, prints, sculpture, and craft pieces. And we've got some, fairly well-known people in the collection. So,
give us an example of some of the people you have in your collection. I've only read about on some of the things that you've published on your website and maybe in a newsletter. But what do you think they're all good, okay? Every piece of work you have, you wouldn't have it in your collection if they weren't exceptional. But there's probably something that you would like to hang, where you could see it every day.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I first started, the collection was primarily paintings, and then we added a few sculptures, had a few photographs, and now the collection is over 50% photography. We have work by Millard Sheets, Milford Zorans, a lot of well-known photographers like Everett Weston, and a lot of people that shot with him and things. And Dodie Weston Thompson was married to his son, and we have a fairly large selection of her work, and then other photographers that she knew and that interfaced with Edward Weston and that whole F-64 group that was started up in Northern California.
Oh, yeah. Exciting. We're going to let everybody know how they can go online. We'll have your web addresses and everything on our website so they can follow up and see what you've got going on, and they can even subscribe to your newsletter. That would be a good thing for them to do, because then they'll know what your latest shows are going to be. I mean, right now, unfortunately, a lot of your shows are online, but eventually the doors will open again and people will be heading out to their favorite museum, and we certainly hope yours is one of them.
Well, till then, he's also doing Zoom art talks, which I understand are fantastic.
How are your Zoom art talks going?
Pretty good. We're doing them on the third Saturday of the month, like when we had them in the museum. And the nice thing about Zoom is that we have participants from outside the area. Frequently, we have people from out of the state that are participating or sitting in on the talk. So,
nice.
In some respects, it's a bigger audience than we had here, because we're just dependent upon local people. And I was always impressed when we had somebody that would drive 50 to 80 miles to get here to see a talk. But the Zoom has really opened up the door into a much bigger audience than what we had before.
Well, you can bring people in from other parts of the world. I mean, they can go on Zoom and hear what you have to say. Yeah,
we haven't done that yet, but we will be doing that pretty soon. So trying to work out the logistics, because it's early in the morning there, because it's at 7 o'clock our time.
Right.
Yeah. Well, people have been referring to the Sasse Museum as the Sasse. It's very catchy. I mean, I like saying, we're going to do a podcast about the Sasse Museum. And they go, oh, that sounds cool. What's that about? What are your thoughts on that particular take on the museum's name, people calling it the Sasse?
Oh, I think it's great. We've had a lot of people saying, it's just, it's really interesting that you have a unique name that, that can be used. And it is really catchy. When I started the museum, I started out as the Inland Empire Museum of Art, because I didn't want the museum to be all about me. And then a marketing company suggested that we change the name. And after giving a lot of thought, decided to do it. It's been very positive, and it is catchy. You remember that much easier than you do a lot of other names.
Well, it's a cool name. I mean, Sasse is a very cool name. You're very lucky to have that name, and it just makes sense for a museum.
Right.
It just totally makes sense. I know, like all museums, I don't know, even the biggest ones all have to address this, but I know you probably had to address the capital needs to keep the museum open. If someone wanted to start an art museum today, what would be your number one recommendation?
To have the money to grow the museum and to hire the talent they need. Mm-hmm. People are surprised on the budget that I'm running the museum on. But we don't have payroll or anything else, so that helps. But it takes money, and you need money to hire the talent you need. Fortunately, I'm doing most of the work, and I have the tools I need to do most of the work. But boy, it sure would be nice to delegate it to other people.
If you could attract someone to come in as to be an assistant or helper, what would you expect that person to be like?
A self-starter and have ideas, to be creative themselves, and bring their tools to the table and to supplement what I can do.
Well, maybe one of our listeners,
somebody
out there will give you a call and explore that. I know that it's hard. You're basically a committee of one. I mean, you do have other people, you do have a board, but museums require it's a 24-hour task. There's no
It really is.
There's no real time that you can get away from it. You have to be constantly working it and creating shows, just curating shows. I mean, most curators, that's all they do is curate a show. You're managing and running the whole thing. So I can imagine, besides capital needs, probably the number one or second thing that is critical is having a good team of people to help you through the operational aspects of it. But from what we've seen, you've done a heck of a job, but I'm sure it would go a lot easier for you if you could attract some people in there to pitch in.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't like to micromanage. If somebody's going to do something, I like to turn it over to them. We've had some outside curators, and they go, "What do you want?" And I go, "Well, you're curating. It's up to you. You tell me what you want to do." And and I've opened up. It's interesting. I've opened up to a lot of different universities and colleges in the area, to the art programs if students want to curate exhibits. And I've only had a couple students that have taken me up on it. And I keep asking over and over. And I would think students would be interested, to curate an exhibit for a museum, but boy, there is very little interest, it seems.
See, that is amazing to me, because here's a chance to, curate something, and I'm not sure, maybe they're a little intimidated and don't want to jump in. Maybe that's the case.
It.
Yeah, maybe that's the case. And that kind of leads me to the next question, which is, we know you have ambitions for the Sasse Museum of Art. Could you share with us your top 3 goals for 2021?
Well, we've talked about one, that's raising money.
Right.
And then also finding additional help. And we've been in discussions moving into a larger space later this year. So.
Oh, that'll be nice.
And then just continuing on what we're doing. But the biggest thing is, need money to grow the museum and to make it even better.
My question is going to be a little bit more personal. You're running a museum, and I can imagine that takes a tremendous amount of your time. But you're also continuing your occupation as a commercial photographer, which is in itself is a challenging business to be in. Do you find it difficult to manage both?
Yeah, sometimes, but no. I have a client, and he always used to joke when we get together for lunch that I was the only person he knew that always ran 2 or 3 businesses all the time. So I ran a commercial photo lab in conjunction with my photography business for a while. Was a web developer and did websites for a number of clients in their electronic marketing. So, and then I've taught off and on. So I've always had my fingers in multiple jars doing things.
Right.
Well, if you had to build an art museum again, what would you tell somebody else that wanted to jump into that? I know we kind of asked that question before, and you talked about go into this business with capital.
Right.
But besides that, almost every business requires that, I guess. But what would be more of a personal thought on this? What do you think the emotional state of that person would have to be?
It takes dedication, perseverance, and willing to want to make a difference in the community.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Yeah, I think it appears to us that you're very dedicated to this. You've been doing it for every bit of, I guess you're going into your 7th year. So that's a lot of time. That's a lot of time to dedicate to a new business venture, especially one that's as demanding as running an art museum and dealing with all the different personalities and coordinating everything. And you just kind of tipped off a good aspect of how a person should probably be. And that would be they'd have to love it and have a total commitment to it. Would you agree?
Yes. One of the things that I thought early on, okay, if I build a good foundation, I could find a city that would help us open doors, not to fund it, but to open doors, to the people that have the money in the community. And I was shocked that the response I got from different cities and counties, that they just didn't want anything to do with it. And I mean, I approached probably a dozen cities, and none of them wanted to be bothered with it.
Interesting. It's very interesting they didn't want to get involved.
Are you getting any cooperation now?
No. And all the research shows that, museums turn around downtown. Mm-hmm. But yet nobody nobody wanted to open doors for us or to even help us, give us, suggestions.
That's interesting, because you would think any downtown would benefit from it. Towns that have adopted, if they have, they build a little art community, they have art galleries down there, and then the restaurants open up and it becomes a happening place to go. I can't think of a better centerpiece for any downtown than to have an art museum. You go to a gallery, and what's going to happen in there? You're going to look at the art, and of course they want to sell you a piece of art so they can keep their doors open. Mm-hmm. But when you walk into an art museum, you're there just to enjoy yourself, get the experience, discover a piece of art that may motivate you to think or do something. It's pretty exciting. It's pretty exciting what you've been doing.
Right.
We congratulate you.
Absolutely. I know that everyone that's had the opportunity to meet with you, Gene, and work with you know that you're passionate when it comes to exhibiting creativity. Over the last several years, what would you consider to be your greatest personal reward?
I guess is producing. I think I've produced about 40 books and catalogs.
Oh my goodness!
And for the museum, for other clients and things. So I guess that would be the biggest thing. And also seeing people that come and get excited. So it's real fun, especially younger people when they come. And we get a lot of students coming here having to write reports for classes and things. And I have a dog that's here and refer to her as the museum dog. And there was a young couple came in. They were working on a school project, and we were talking. And I mentioned that she likes bell peppers, and I've got some clients that bring her bell pepper when they came.
Aww.
And anyway, they left and came back about a half hour later with a bag of bell peppers. They go, "We didn't believe you that she liked bell peppers. We wanted to see her eat one."
Now, I have to say a comment about your dog. When we came to an exhibition, I was astounded that she actually looks at the paintings like a person. She'll sit there and reflect and walk from painting to painting. It is the most amazing thing I have ever seen.
Yeah, she's taught me a lot.
I love it.
That seems like a good place to end this interview, Gene. You were a fabulous guest, and we're going to provide the information to everybody so they can discover who you are, where you are, have them subscribe to your newsletter. We'll put all that information out.
Right. We'll be putting it in the show notes under the podcast. So if anyone wants to visit it online, or when we can, visit it in person or participate in an art talk, that way you'll have everything you need. So.
Yeah, and right away you can visit the sasseartmuseum.org. sasseartmuseum.org. Mm-hmm. Sasse is spelled S-A-S-S-E. Check it out. I think you'll discover something really interesting there. And by all means, you may want to subscribe to the newsletter. That's always
to keep you in the
very
loop.
Informative. So we'll post all of the museum contacts, the information, show notes, like Angie said. Mm-hmm. And from me, thanks again, Gene.
Yes, and thank you, Gene, for being on the show today.
Well, thank you for asking me. This was quite fun. I was pretty nervous before starting, but this was really quite enjoyable. And I thank both you, Rod and Angie, for asking me.
Oh, you're very welcome.
No, we were happy. We were very proud and happy to have you as a guest, and I think our listeners are going to really enjoy what you have to say, because you're not going to get this kind of information typically from any director of a museum. They're not gonna tell it like it really is, and probably not be as genuine as you've been. And that, I think, is what we appreciate the most about this interview. We're extremely genuine and forthcoming with your thoughts and ideas. But bye for now.
All right, take care.
Bye.
I'm really glad you tuned in today. We hope you enjoyed the thoughts and ideas we shared with you.
We post a new podcast every week, so remember to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss an episode. So it's bye for now from my husband Rod and I, wishing everyone a great day.